If someone had asked me a year ago what my biggest fear was, I probably would have said losing my job. I never would have guessed the real answer was finding out my own family had been planning to use me like a walking ATM. My name is Ethan. I'm 32 years old, and until recently, I believed hard work solved almost everything. I grew up in a middle-class family in Ohio. My dad worked in manufacturing for over 30 years, and my mom stayed home until my younger sister, Madison, started high school. We weren't rich, but we never went hungry either. My parents raised me with one simple rule: family always comes first. Those words became the foundation of my life. When Dad's truck broke down, I paid for the repairs. When Mom needed surgery that insurance didn't completely cover, I emptied nearly all of my savings without thinking twice. When Madison called crying because she couldn't afford another semester of college, I wired her $15,000 the same day. Never asked for repayment. Not once. Because that's what family did. Or at least, that's what I believed. By 32, I had finally built the life I'd spent more than a decade chasing. I was a senior software engineer making just over $200,000 a year. That sounds impressive. What nobody sees behind numbers like that is the sacrifice. 70-hour work weeks, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, sleeping in airport lounges because another client meeting couldn't wait. I drove the same 6-year-old SUV, lived in a modest townhouse, cooked most nights instead of eating out. People assumed I was cheap. The truth was simpler. I had one dream: to buy my own home outright before I turned 35. No mortgage. No debt. No financial stress. Every bonus. Every raise. Every tax refund. Every overtime check. It all went into that house fund. 8 years of discipline. 8 years of saying no. 8 years of believing delayed gratification would eventually pay off. Then Madison got engaged. The entire family acted like we'd won the lottery. Her fiancé, Tyler, came from money. Old money. Country club money. Private school money. Summer home on the lake money. Their engagement party looked more like a celebrity event than a family gathering. Champagne fountains. Professional photographers. Live jazz music. Designer floral arrangements. I remember quietly asking Madison, "Isn't this a little extravagant?" She laughed. "Oh, Ethan, this is actually one of the smaller events." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next several months, every conversation somehow circled back to the wedding. The venue. The flowers. The imported Italian table settings. The 7-course dinner. The custom designer dress. The fireworks display. The horse-drawn carriage. Every week the budget somehow doubled. At Thanksgiving, Dad proudly announced, "This wedding is going to be unforgettable." Mom smiled. My little girl deserves the very best. I smiled too, because I genuinely wanted Madison to be happy. What I didn't know was that everyone at that table had already decided who would pay for it. Me. 2 weeks later, Mom called. "Sweetheart, can you come over Sunday? We need to talk." Her voice sounded unusually formal. I assumed someone was sick. Maybe Dad had another health scare. Maybe they were struggling financially. So I drove over immediately. The moment I walked inside, something felt off. Everyone was there. Mom. Dad. Madison. Tyler. Even Tyler's parents. The dining room table looked like a corporate board meeting. Folders, Printed spreadsheets. Laptops. Pens. Nobody was smiling. Dad cleared his throat. "Sit down, son." That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. I sat. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know how much we love you." Whenever a conversation starts that way, run. Dad slid a folder toward me. "We've been reviewing the wedding expenses." I opened it. The first page nearly made me choke. Projected wedding budget: $312,487. I blinked. Surely I had read it wrong. $312,000? For a wedding? Madison laughed nervously. "It's actually pretty average for Tyler's family." Average? I looked at Tyler. He avoided eye contact. Dad folded his hands. "Tyler's parents are generously contributing $150,000. I nodded slowly. "Okay. Your mother and I are putting in $84,000. Again. "Okay." Then Dad smiled. "And we'd like you to contribute the remaining $78,000. Silence. Complete silence. I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry." "What?" Mom said it like she was asking me to pass the salt. 78,000. I stared around the table. Nobody looked embarrassed. Nobody looked uncomfortable. They were waiting for me to say yes. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to believe what I just heard. "You guys are joking." Nobody laughed back. Dad leaned forward. "You're the most successful member of this family." Mom nodded. "And Madison only gets married once." I looked directly at my sister. She smiled. Actually smiled. "Ethan, you've always taken care of me." I felt something inside my chest tighten. "I've already helped pay for college." "We know." "I helped with your car." "We appreciate that." "I paid Mom's medical bills." "And we're grateful." "So why am I paying for your wedding too?" Madison crossed her arms. "Because you can." Those 3 words hit harder than any insult. Because you can. Not because it was my responsibility. Not because they needed help. Not because there was an emergency. Simply because they believed I had money. Dad spoke calmly. "Think of it as investing in your sister's future." I frowned. "A wedding isn't an investment." Tyler's father finally joined the conversation. "In our social circle, appearances matter." I turned toward him. "Then maybe your social circle should pay for it." The room instantly froze. Mom shot me a warning look. Dad's jaw clenched. "Ethan." "What?" "Watch your tone." I couldn't believe this. I wasn't the one asking someone else for nearly $80,000. Dad continued. "You've been blessed. I worked for everything I have. And family helped you." "No, they didn't." The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence. Absolute silence. Dad's face darkened. "What did you say?" I said, "Family didn't help me. I paid my own tuition. Worked nights. Graduated with debt. Moved into a studio apartment with secondhand furniture. Built my career from scratch. Nobody handed me anything. Mom looked offended. We raised you. You were supposed to. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Madison suddenly stood. I knew you'd do this. Do what? Make everything about yourself. I blinked. I'm making this about me? Yes. It's my wedding. You've been saving all this money while the rest of us struggle. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Saving money had somehow become a crime. Dad sighed dramatically. This is disappointing. Disappointing? I looked around the table. Nobody seemed shocked by the request. Which meant this wasn't spontaneous. They had discussed it beforehand. Extensively. Probably for weeks. Maybe months. They had already decided I would pay. Without ever asking me. Without considering my own plans. Without respecting my goals. I closed the folder. No. One word. Just one. The explosion was immediate. Mom burst into tears. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Madison started yelling. Tyler kept staring at the floor. His parents whispered to each other. I stood. I love you all. But I'm not spending $78,000 on a single day. Mom cried louder. So money matters more than your sister? No. My future matters too. Dad pointed toward the door. If that's really how you feel, you can leave. So I did. The drive home felt unreal. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Mom! Dad? Madison. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Word spread unbelievably fast. By evening, half the family believed I'd refused to support my sister. Nobody mentioned the amount. Nobody mentioned the luxury wedding. Nobody mentioned the fact that I'd already given this family tens of thousands over the years. Only one narrative survived. Ethan abandoned his family. For the next week, I ignored the guilt trips, the angry texts, the emotional voicemails, the Facebook posts with passive-aggressive Bible verses. Then, one Friday afternoon, everything changed. I was sitting in my office finishing a client presentation when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a call. It was an email notification. The sender wasn't anyone in my family. It was Tyler. The subject line simply read, I'm sorry, you deserve to know the truth. My heart started racing. I opened the email. There was only one sentence. I accidentally received something that was meant for your parents. Underneath it was a forwarded email chain. I clicked the attachment, and within seconds, I realized the $78,000 wasn't the biggest betrayal. Not even close. For almost a full minute, I just stared at my computer screen. I hadn't clicked the attachment yet. Part of me didn't want to. Whatever Tyler had sent couldn't be good. He wouldn't have written, you deserve to know the truth, unless he believed it would change everything. I took a slow breath and opened the file. The attachment contained screenshots of an email conversation. The first message had been sent almost 3 months earlier. From Mom to Dad Madison. Subject, wedding budget. At first, it looked harmless. Then I kept reading. Mom, we need to stop worrying about the budget. Ethan has plenty of money. He won't let his little sister down. Dad replied 20 minutes later. Don't ask him yet. Let him think we're struggling first. He always gives more when he feels responsible. My stomach dropped. I reread the sentence. Then again. And again. He always gives more when he feels responsible. That wasn't a family talking about someone they loved. That was a strategy. I kept scrolling. Another email. This one from Madison. Maybe we should tell him Tyler's parents expect us to match their contribution. Ethan hates disappointing people. Mom responded almost immediately. Exactly. We'll make it about family. He won't say no. My hands started shaking. The meeting at my parents' house. The tears. The speeches. The guilt. None of it had been real. Every word had been rehearsed. Every reaction planned. I wasn't a son. I wasn't a brother. I was the financing plan. But the next email hurt even more. Dad wrote, "If he hesitates, remind him about Mom's surgery. He still feels guilty about almost losing her." I froze. Mom's surgery? The operation I'd paid for because I genuinely believed my parents couldn't afford it. The surgery that wiped out nearly 80% of my savings at the time? I kept reading. My heart felt heavier with every line. "He's still trying to save for a house," Madison wrote. "Then he can wait another few years," Mom answered. "He's single anyway. What's the rush?" That sentence crushed me. For years, I'd put my own life on hold. I skipped vacations. I skipped dating. I missed holidays because I was working overtime. Every sacrifice had one purpose. A home. Something stable. Something that belonged to me. And the people I'd sacrificed for? They joked about delaying that dream. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. I leaned back in my chair, trying to breathe. But the emails weren't finished. Far from it. Toward the bottom of the chain was another message. One that explained why Tyler had forwarded everything to me. It had been sent the night before the family meeting. From Madison. To Mom and Dad. She accidentally included Tyler. She meant to send it only to her parents. Instead, her fiancé saw everything. The email read, "Don't worry, Ethan's too soft to refuse. If he says no at first, Mom just needs to cry. That always works." A minute later, Dad replied, "Worst case, we tell everyone he abandoned the family. He cares too much about his reputation." Then Mom added, "Exactly. Once the relatives start calling him selfish, he'll cave." I stopped reading. I couldn't. My vision blurred. Not because I was angry. Because I was heartbroken. I had spent 32 years believing my parents loved me unconditionally. Maybe they did once. But somewhere along the way, love had become expectation. Expectation became entitlement. Entitlement became manipulation. And I hadn't noticed until now. A knock on my office door startled me. My manager peeked inside. "You okay?" I quickly minimized the emails. "Yeah. You don't look okay. I just got some bad family news." He nodded sympathetically. "Take the rest of the day." Normally, I would have argued. Deadlines mattered. Clients mattered. But not today. Today I drove home without turning on the radio. Without making a single phone call. Without even realizing how I got there. I walked into my townhouse, dropped my keys on the counter, and just stood there. The silence felt deafening. For years, I'd believed I was building a future surrounded by people who wanted the best for me. Now I wasn't even sure they knew who I really was. Or cared. That evening, my phone rang. Mom! I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, Dad called. Ignored. Then Madison. Ignored. Another cousin. Ignored. Finally, Tyler texted me. I'm really sorry, Ethan. I never meant to see those emails. But after reading them, I couldn't stay quiet. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Why are you helping me? His answer came almost instantly. Because I thought I was marrying into a good family. Now I'm not so sure. That surprised me. Tyler had barely spoken during the meeting. I'd assumed he agreed with everyone else. Apparently, he'd been just as uncomfortable as I was. The next morning, there was another knock on my front door. When I opened it, Dad was standing there, alone. His expression was serious. Can we talk? I considered closing the door. Instead, I stepped outside. What do you want? He sighed dramatically. Your mother hasn't slept. I said nothing. Madison's devastated. Still nothing. He looked disappointed. This isn't how we raised you. For the first time in my life, I looked my father directly in the eyes without fear. No. He frowned. No what? This isn't how you raised me. What does that mean? You raised me to be generous. I was. You raised me to help family. I did. You also raised me to believe family would never manipulate me. His face changed. Just slightly. Almost impossible to notice. Almost. What are you talking about? I watched him carefully. Waiting. Giving him one chance. One opportunity to tell the truth. He didn't. Instead, he said, Your mother's been crying for 2 days. There it was again. Guilt. Always guilt. Never honesty. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots Tyler had sent, then held the screen in front of Dad's face. His eyes widened immediately. He recognized the email. Every color drained from his face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, Where did you get that? I ignored the question. So, this was all planned? He swallowed hard. It's not what it looks like. I actually laughed. A bitter, exhausted laugh. Dad, I've read every email. He rubbed his forehead. We were just discussing possibilities. Mom just needs to cry. Silence. Tell everyone he abandoned the family. More silence. He'll wait a few more years to buy a house. He couldn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. The evidence spoke louder than excuses ever could. After nearly a minute, he quietly said, You weren't supposed to see those. Those 6 words changed everything. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we made a terrible mistake. Not, please forgive us. No, his biggest concern was getting caught. I looked at my father, the man I'd admired my entire life, the man whose approval I'd spent decades chasing. And for the first time, I didn't recognize him. "I think you should leave." He stared at me. "Ethan!" "No." My voice was calm. Calmer than I'd expected. "I think we're done talking." He took one hesitant step toward me. "I'm still your father. And I was still your son when you wrote those emails." That landed. I could see it in his eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it, then slowly turned around. As he walked back to his truck, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt grief, because sometimes the hardest part isn't losing people. It's realizing they stopped being the people you thought they were a long time ago. I went back inside, locked the door, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not because of the money, not because of the wedding, but because I was mourning a family that perhaps had never really existed. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Because 48 hours later, another email arrived. This one wasn't from Tyler. It wasn't from my parents. It was from someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 10 years. The subject line read, "There's something about your college fund you need to know." I stared at the sender's name. It was my late grandfather's attorney. And what I learned next would prove that the wedding wasn't the beginning of the betrayal. It was only the latest chapter. Barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those emails. "Mom just needs to cry. Tell everyone he abandoned the family. He can wait a few more years to buy a house." Those weren't words from strangers. They came from the 3 people I had trusted more than anyone else. By Monday morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue with them anymore. I wasn't going to defend myself. And I definitely wasn't going to keep explaining why I refused to spend $78,000 on someone else's luxury wedding. Instead, I was going to find out how long this had been happening. That afternoon, I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop. Across the top, I typed one simple title: "Money I gave my family." At first, I thought it would only take a few minutes. I couldn't have been more wrong. I searched through 8 years of bank statements. Every transfer, every check, every Venmo payment, every wire transfer, every cashier's check. The list kept growing. $15,000 for Madison's college tuition. $8,700 to repair my parents' roof after a storm. $6,200 for Dad's truck. $4,900 to cover Madison's credit card debt after she fell behind. $21,000 for Mom's surgery. $3,500 when Dad said he was short on property taxes. Another $2,400 when Madison needed help with rent. Holiday gifts. Birthday checks. Flights to visit them. Hotel rooms. Countless dinners. Small expenses I had forgotten about. 3 hours later, I stared at the total. $96,438. I blinked, then checked the math again. $96,000. Almost $100,000. Over the years, I had quietly given my family nearly 6 figures. And somehow, they still believed I hadn't done enough. I leaned back in my chair, completely stunned. Not once had I asked for anything in return. Not a receipt. Not repayment. Not even a thank you that lasted longer than a few days. The generosity had become expected. Expected had turned into obligation. and obligation had become entitlement. My phone buzzed. It was Tyler. "Can we meet?" I hesitated. A week ago, I barely knew the guy. Now he was the only person connected to my family who seemed willing to tell me the truth. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our offices. When I arrived, Tyler was already there. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Untouched coffee. Nervous hands. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "I almost didn't. I wouldn't blame you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he slid another envelope across the table. "I found something else." I looked at him carefully. "What is this?" "It's not another email." "It's worse." Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of invoices from the wedding planner. One page immediately caught my attention. "Luxury wedding budget revision." I scanned the numbers. "Venue upgrade." Imported flowers. Ice sculpture. Fireworks. Celebrity DJ. Custom wedding favors. Private security. Everything about this wedding screamed excess. Then I noticed a handwritten note in the margin. "Increase Ethan's contribution to cover final upgrades." I looked up. "What is this?" Tyler sighed. "They increased your amount." "What?" "The original plan wasn't 78,000. It was 50. I stared at him. "They kept adding things they couldn't afford. So every time the budget went up?" He nodded. "They expected you to cover the difference." I couldn't believe it. They hadn't picked a number because they needed it. They picked a number because they assumed I'd never refuse. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck. "There's something else." I waited. He looked genuinely embarrassed. "My parents never asked your family to match our contribution." "What?" "They never expected that." "But your father said—" "I know." "He lied." The words echoed in my head. So the biggest argument they had used, the one about keeping up with Tyler's family, had been completely fabricated. Why? Tyler looked down. "I think they were embarrassed." "Embarrassed?" "My parents offered to pay more. But your dad insisted everyone should contribute." "So your parents weren't demanding anything?" "No. They actually suggested making the wedding smaller." I let out a slow breath. Every excuse my parents had used, every emotional speech, every guilt trip, one lie after another. As if that wasn't enough, Tyler pulled out his phone. "I probably shouldn't show you this." "But you deserve to know." He opened a group chat. The participants were Madison, Tyler, and Madison's maid of honor. He handed me the phone. The messages were from 3 nights earlier. Madison: "Once Ethan pays, we can upgrade to the ballroom package." Another message: "He's impossible to say no to if Mom cries." Then another: "Worst case, Dad guilts him with the family comes first speech." I stopped reading. The exact speech Dad had given me. Word for word. Scripted. Rehearsed. Planned. Nothing about that meeting had been genuine. Not one single thing. I slowly handed Tyler's phone back. "Why are you marrying her?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out the window. I honestly don't know anymore. That evening, I received another surprise. My Aunt Linda called. She rarely contacted me directly. Ethan? Hi, Aunt Linda. I wanted to ask you something. Sure. Your mother said you promised to pay for the wedding months ago. I closed my eyes. There it is. What? That's not true. Silence. I never agreed to pay anything. She sounded confused. She told everyone you changed your mind at the last minute. I felt my stomach sink. So that explained the angry phone calls, the disappointed relatives, the accusations. My parents hadn't simply told people I refused. They had invented an entirely different story. A story where I'd broken a promise. Aunt Linda, can I ask you something? Of course. If someone asked you for $78,000, would you think that's reasonable? She gasped. 78,000? They never told us an amount. I laughed bitterly. Exactly. Another long silence. Then she quietly said, I think your mother left out a few details. A few? Ethan, I'm sorry. Those two words meant more to me than she probably realized. For the first time all week, someone believed me. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Not because people were angry anymore. Because they were asking questions. Apparently, Aunt Linda had spoken to two uncles. One uncle spoke to another cousin. Within hours, the family story started falling apart. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Did they really ask for $78,000? Did Ethan already give them money over the years? Did they actually lie about him making a promise? The cracks were spreading faster than my parents could repair them. Around noon, Dad sent me a single text. Stop talking to the family. I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, another message. You're humiliating your mother. Still nothing. Then another. This doesn't need to become public. I looked at the screen and smiled for the first time in days. Interesting. When they thought I was alone, they had no problem destroying my reputation. Now that the truth was reaching everyone else, suddenly they wanted privacy. That evening, Tyler called again. I have news. What happened? I canceled the final meeting with the wedding planner. You did? I told Madison we need to slow down. And? He let out a tired sigh. She wasn't upset that I canceled. She was upset because she thought your money might disappear. I felt my heart sink. Not because I was surprised. Because hearing it out loud somehow made it more real. Tyler continued. I asked her one simple question. What? If Ethan never had money, would you still expect him to help? I waited. What did she say? There was a long pause. Finally, Tyler answered quietly. She said, then he'd be useless in this situation. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Not her brother. Not family. Not someone she loved. Useful. Or useless. Nothing in between. That was the moment I realized something painful. I hadn't lost my family this week. I'd only lost the illusion of who I thought they were. And I made a promise to myself. The next time we all sat in the same room, I wouldn't come to argue. I wouldn't come to defend myself. I'd come with bank records, emails, text messages, receipts, and one question no one in my family would be able to answer. If family always comes first, why was I the only one living by that rule? I had no idea that confrontation would happen much sooner than expected. Because less than 24 hours later, Mom announced an emergency family dinner. She said it was to heal the family. But Tyler texted me before I even responded. Don't trust them. They're planning something. And this time, I wasn't walking into that house unprepared. I sat in my car for almost 5 minutes before walking up to my parents' front door. The same house. The same front porch. The same family I'd spent my entire life trying to make proud. Only this time, I wasn't carrying guilt. I was carrying evidence. Inside my leather briefcase were printed bank statements, copies of every email Tyler had forwarded, screenshots of text messages, and a spreadsheet detailing nearly $100,000 I had given my family over the past 8 years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that house to solve someone else's problem. I was walking in to end one. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Mom answered almost immediately. For a split second, her face softened. Then she noticed the briefcase. Her smile disappeared. You actually came. I said I would. She stepped aside without another word. The dining room was already full. Dad sat at the head of the table. Madison sat beside him, arms crossed. Tyler was across from her, unusually quiet. Around the table were my Aunt Linda, Uncle Greg, 2 cousins, and my grandmother. The room felt tense. No one reached for the food. No one was making small talk. It was obvious this wasn't a family dinner. It was a trial. Only my parents still believed I was the one on trial. Dad cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. He looked directly at me. We're here because this family is falling apart. I nodded. I agree. He seemed surprised I didn't argue. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Ethan, we don't know why you've been telling people private family business. I calmly placed my briefcase on the table. I haven't. You have. I answered questions after you lied about me. The room fell silent. Dad leaned forward. Vi never lit. I slowly opened my briefcase. I was hoping you'd say that. One by one, I placed several folders on the table. Dad's expression changed instantly. He recognized them. The emails. Mom's face turned pale. Madison stopped looking at me altogether. Aunt Linda frowned. What are those? I slid one copy toward her. The emails my parents never expected me to see. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. 30 seconds later, her mouth slowly opened. She looked at my mother. Karen, did you really write this? Mom's lips trembled. It's being taken out of context. Dad immediately interrupted. Those weren't meant for anyone else. I looked at him. I know. But you still wrote them. No one spoke. I turned to the next page. Dad, would you like me to read this out loud? He didn't answer. So I did. Don't ask him yet. Let him think we're struggling first. He always gives more when he feels responsible. The room went completely silent. I read another. If he hesitates, remind him about Mom's surgery. Then another. Worst case, we tell everyone he abandoned the family. Every sentence hit harder than the last. By the time I finished, no one was looking at me anymore. They were all staring at my parents. Grandma was the first to speak. Is this real? Mom whispered. Yes. But... Grandma raised her hand. No. I asked if it was real. Mom lowered her head. Yes. The disappointment on my grandmother's face was heartbreaking. I didn't raise you to manipulate your own son. Dad tried to defend himself. We were under pressure. So was Ethan. He has money. Grandma looked directly at him. And whose money is it? Dad had no answer. I reached into my briefcase again. This isn't all. I handed everyone copies of my spreadsheet. Across the top it read, "Financial assistance provided to family." The room became strangely quiet as everyone looked down the list. College tuition, medical bills, truck repairs, roof repairs, credit card debt, rent, holiday expenses, emergency loans. At the bottom, the total. $96,438. Uncle Greg looked up first. $96,000? I nodded. And none of it was ever repaid. Madison finally spoke. We never asked you to keep score. I looked at her. I wasn't. You did. No. I was reminding everyone that this isn't about one wedding. It's about years of believing I existed whenever someone needed money. Her eyes narrowed. You're exaggerating. Before I could answer, Tyler quietly pushed his chair back. I don't think he is. Every head turned toward him. Madison looked shocked. Tyler? He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the table. I've stayed quiet long enough. He opened the group chat, then slid the phone toward Aunt Linda. She read the messages aloud. Once Ethan pays, we can upgrade the ballroom package. Another? Mom crying always works. Another. If Ethan had less money, he'd be useless in this situation. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Madison's face turned bright red. She reached for the phone. Tyler picked it up before she could. You've lied to me for months. I was joking. You weren't. You don't understand. No. I finally do. He stood up, then looked directly at my parents. When my family offered to pay more, we weren't trying to embarrass anyone. We just wanted Madison to have a beautiful wedding. Dad lowered his eyes. Tyler continued. But instead of telling us you couldn't afford everything, you decided Ethan would. No one disagreed. Because no one could. Then Tyler turned toward me. Ethan, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. I gave him a small nod. Thank you. He looked at Madison one last time. I can't marry someone who sees people as bank accounts. Madison's eyes filled with tears. So you're leaving me? I'm leaving the lies. He removed his engagement ring, placed it gently on the dining room table, and walked toward the front door. The sound of it closing echoed through the house. No one moved. No one even breathed. The wedding, the one everyone had sacrificed so much to protect, was over. Mom suddenly broke down crying. Real crying this time. Not the carefully rehearsed version I'd seen before. She looked at me through tears. We made a mistake. I stayed quiet. Dad slowly stood. I spent the last week convincing myself we were doing this for Madison. He looked around the room, but somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing my own son. For the first time all evening, he sounded sincere. I'm sorry. Those words were genuine. I could hear it, but they didn't erase what happened. Apologies can begin healing. They don't erase scars. Mom reached across the table. I know we don't deserve forgiveness. No. You don't. Her hand slowly fell back into her lap. But, I continued, I don't want revenge. Everyone looked at me. I just want the truth. I looked around the room. So let's tell it. I never promised to pay for the wedding. Several relatives nodded. I've spent years helping this family because I loved you. More nods. But love isn't supposed to come with invoices. And generosity isn't supposed to become obligation. I picked up my briefcase. I'm done being treated like an emergency fund. No one tried to stop me. As I reached the front door, Grandma called my name. Ethan. I turned around. She slowly walked over and hugged me tighter than she had in years. I'm proud of you. Those 4 words nearly broke me. Not because they were dramatic. Because I'd waited my entire life to hear them from someone in my family. 3 months later, the wedding never happened. Tyler quietly ended the engagement. He later sent me a message thanking me for unknowingly saving him from a marriage built on manipulation. Madison moved back into my parents' house. For the first time in years, she had to pay her own bills. Dad called me several times, not asking for money, just asking if we could talk. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. Trust, I learned, is rebuilt in inches, not with one apology. Mom eventually wrote me a handwritten letter, not asking for forgiveness, simply acknowledging every lie, every manipulation, and every time she'd taken my generosity for granted. I kept the letter, not because it fixed everything, but because it was the first honest thing she'd given me in years. As for me, 6 months after everything happened, I bought the house I'd been saving for. The same dream everyone else had been willing to postpone. The day I received the keys, I walked through every empty room by myself. No fancy furniture. No decorations. Just silence. But for the first time in a long time, it was a peaceful silence. I stood in the living room and smiled. Not because I finally owned a house, because I finally understood something that had taken me 32 years to learn. Helping family is a gift. Being expected to sacrifice your future so others can fund their lifestyle is not. Real love never demands that you prove it with your bank account. And sometimes, the most expensive thing you'll ever pay for is the approval of people who only value you for what you can give. The day I stopped paying that price was the day I truly became free. The end